CargoWise Landside is deeply committed to revolutionizing landside logistics. With a complete enterprise system built for modern trucking and container drayage operators that includes proven drayage transportation management, digital rate and quote management, real-time container track and tracing, and on-demand truck, trailer, and container storage. Excellence in container drayage starts with the right software. Enhance transportation management, optimize shipment execution, and improve intermodal business operations with Trinium TMS, Draymaster, GeoStamp Track, and SecureSpace. To learn more, please visit cargowise.com/landside.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're joining us from somewhere that's not in North America. I'm Eric Johnson, and if you are tuning into LogTech Live, you're in the right place. I'm host every first and third Fridays of every month to talk with some of the most insightful people in our industry primarily about technology, but sometimes about other things. Today, we're definitely talking technology. Before I get started, let me know, anyone who's tuning in, let me know where you're watching from. Would love to know where our audience is coming from. Thank you so much if this is a normal thing for you to be tuning into LogTech Live. If this is your first episode, you picked a good one. We have a great conversation for you on tap today. So I wanted to, before I introduce my guest and before I go through a little bit of news of the week, TPM is, I think we're about 4 months away. Forgot the exact, I think 16 weeks out, something like that. So it's a little bit less than 4 months. Advance rates ended last week, but because I care about my audience, I have a code, which I will share with you at the end of the show, to get a discount off of registration if you haven't registered before. So stay tuned for that. I'll let you know about that at the end of the show. TPM Tech, over the next few episodes, I'm going to be going over some of the topics that we're talking about at TPM Tech this year. We're going to be discussing AI. We're going to be discussing electronic bills of lading. We're going to be discussing smart containers. We're going to be discussing visibility, foreshadowing. That's our topic for today as well. We are going to be talking about a bunch of things. Also, how software is more usable, how to make software more usable, and how to make it more approachable especially from a BCO perspective. So I will be going through a lot of that over the next few episodes as we lead into TPM. Really excited about the program as a whole, but obviously, especially the technology side of things. I also wanted to mention that we recently opened up registration for the Journal of Commerce's Break Bulk and Project Cargo Conference in New Orleans. That's in April. It's a great event. It's a niche event. If you're in that world, you sort of need to go to it. It's the biggest and best gathering of people focused around issues. It's not an exhibition. It's very much like all other Journal of Commerce events, centered around the program and earnest discussions about what's going on in the market. As usual, I'll be leading some programming around technology there. And it's always great to catch up with people in the Big Easy. So you have until December 15th to get early bird pricing on that. So do not wait. This is the best prices you're going to get. Okay, news of the week. Every week is busy these days. We had an election last week. I'm not going to go into it. I wasn't even supposed to talk about it. Whoops. There's lots of news in our world too. Uber Freight. Yesterday, I wrote about this in the Journal of Commerce yesterday, and interesting product that the Uber Freight released. Uber Freight, as you know, bought Transplace, or you may not know, 3 years ago bought Transplace, significantly increased the size of its business by buying a huge 3PL in the domestic transportation space, including a huge managed transportation service. But, they sort of came up trying to help revolutionize the freight brokerage space. And so yesterday they announced a product called Broker Access, which if you follow what I do, and if you follow the brokerage industry, you might think, oh, well, that looks like something that Convoy, a company that's now out of business, released a few years ago. And you'd be right. the same guy who started this program at Convoy is now at Uber Freight. And the product is essentially opening up technology and Uber Freight's capacity network to other brokers. It's not going to be the easiest sell. Certainly, there's going to be brokers who don't want to work at all with Uber as a rival. But I talked with Uber about this. There's a firewall between this product and their brokerage division. It's really meant to help give those drivers access to more loads. There's a huge conversation still ongoing on LinkedIn about this, started by Andrew Silver, famously of the Silver family, who started Molos Solutions. That was acquired by ArcBest. He's now with a TMS provider called Mastery. He wrote about how he thinks this product is essentially constitutes double brokering. Other people chimed in and said it's called co-brokering. Other people said it's fine. There's no problem with this. Join in the conversation. It's a really interesting kind of product development. I'm very dispassionate about it. I just wrote about it because I thought it's interesting from a shipper perspective to see brokers they may be using having access to Uber Freight's capacity network. The next story I'll highlight, I did this a week or so ago about freight payment. This is a topic I've covered a lot over the course of my career. What's interesting is technology is sort of enabling companies to go after smaller variances in the invoices they receive from carriers across modes than maybe was possible in the past. It used to be that if companies would establish a threshold. If the variance, if the overbilling was under $15, just pay it. Don't worry about it. It's going to cost us more time and effort to chase down and dispute that $15 than it is to, actually get it back. So technology is changing that. It's making that whole process more efficient. So you can go after smaller variances. And in fact, one of the providers I talked to in this said the majority of what they're kind of finding in their dispute process can be sub $5, in fact. And if you take that over thousands and thousands of freight bills, it all adds up. So very interesting, really interesting how technology is sort of empowering a new way to think about the payment and reconciliation process. Last story I'll highlight, I wrote about this earlier this week as well. DAT and Kilvar. This is an example of something that I wrote about a long time ago that just has continued throughout the last few years. This proliferance of partnerships between technology providers, between data providers and technology providers. My guest today is with a company that does lots of these types of partnerships as well, so we may get into that. But in this particular instance, DAT is providing truckload benchmark pricing to Kilvar, a freight procurement software platform. Kilvar uses other providers to benchmark ocean freight rates. This is now part of the deal. We are now in a platform sort of phase of logistics technology where it can't be expected that every single company has everything to offer a specific customer. It's really, do you use one piece of software and you get access to a whole bunch of data sources that provider is partnered with, or a complementary function that partner, that your primary software provider is partnering with another software provider to kind of complement what they do. This is the way it works now. Integrations are much more prevalent. They're easier to undertake for the technical teams. And the benefit is from the customers, you're not having to invest in a huge end-to-end sort of platform anymore. You can invest in something that's sort of the backbone for your transportation department, and then you get access to all sorts of things like DAT truckload benchmarking. So really interesting, just a kind of continuation of this years-long trend, and I would expect to see this ramp up significantly over the next few years. So think about your data partnerships and your own data partnerships and the ones that your technology providers have with the rest of the ecosystem. Now, with no further ado, I'm super excited to invite my guest this week, Chris Mazza, who's the SVP of International Growth at a company called Shippeo, one of the primary transportation visibility providers globally. Chris, Great to have you. I was literally just at your event in Paris a week ago. It was fantastic to be there. It was fantastic to meet your team and customers, but it's really great to have you on the show this week.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. A pleasure to be here. And yeah, it was great to see you in Paris. Croissants for everyone every day. So no, thanks for having me on the show.
Excellent. Yeah, so we've known each other a few years now, and before we get into what Shippeo is, maybe give people a little background on yourself before you came to Shippeo.
Yeah, sure. My name's Chris Mazza. Yeah, I work for Shippeo, and I started off in the ocean carrier space. So first working on a terminal, then working for a steamship agent in Boston, the old Peabody and Lane. I went through the MERS training program, the MEAS program, and then I spent about 12 years in the ocean carrier space, mainly in operations. At that time, that was the late 80s to the late 90s. That's when the ocean carriers were building out all their internal systems. Back then, it was LANs and WANs, and then all of a sudden, wow, the internet happened, and it began to change a lot of things that the ocean carriers did internally, and then how they began to view their customers externally. But that's really where I learned the business. The last 25 years or so, I've been out here in Silicon Valley. And Shippeo is my fourth startup in this vertical. The first one was International Asset Systems. That was acquired by Bloom and is now part of WiseTech, one of the sponsors of this show. And then I work with Navis. They're the biggest terminal operator software provider out there in the XValor program. And then before Shippeo, a company called Clear Metal. And we specialized in ocean tracking, ocean container tracking, and that was sold to Project 44. And so I joined Shippeo about a little over 3 years ago.
Chris, I can't believe we never met because I've covered every single one of the companies that you just mentioned over the course of my career. So it's crazy that we only met once you got to Shippeo, but I'm glad we did. Can you give people a little background on what Shippeo is? What do you do? Who do you serve? Just kind of give people a little bit of a landscape for that.
Of course. Shippeo was founded about 10 years ago, at the same time as our main competitors. We were founded out of Paris in Europe. And so our specialty is we provide real-time transport visibility, and we answer two core foundational questions. Where is my freight, and when will it arrive? Originally, we started, like everybody, or almost everybody in the space, focused on road. That is road in Europe, FTL, LTL, parcel, multi-stop, whatever the case may be. And then we expanded into ocean, rail, and air. But Shippeo is a company based in France. We now have our offices in Chicago and Singapore, so we've expanded globally pretty much like everybody. What we are is a platform. If you need to know where your freight is, regardless of the mode or the geography, it's our job to get that data to you and give it to you, along with the predictions from the carrier, the ETAs, and also our predictions about when something will arrive, or if it's delayed.
So it's a very interesting time to be talking to you, not just because I was at the event that you held last week, but also been thinking big picture about like coverage of this space. And as I think back, this year has been kind of crazy. Maybe not as crazy as during the pandemic, but the variety of things that have happened this year and how that relates to the visibility market. So we've had I'm just naming things off the top of my head. Suez closure, essentially closes for business end of 23. Baltimore Bridge collapses in the middle of the year. We've had ILA threatened port strike, short strike, another one kind of looming on the horizon. We have ongoing closures at Canadian ports. Where in the context of all that, where would you say the visibility market is, say, relative to pre and post pandemic?
Yeah, so don't forget the Panama Canal drought.
Panama Canal.
Don't forget the congestion issues in Singapore. Yes. Because remember, when the Red Sea crisis started, all of a sudden, what you saw is all the transshipment hubs begin to fill up. And then the carriers moved to secondary hubs. So we could see the spread around the world, whether it was Singapore, whether it was Jebel Ali, whether it was Gyotaro, all of a sudden places where you typically didn't have massive congestion, you did. So anyway, a long-winded way of saying the congestions are pretty epic, or the disruptions. And just like you mentioned, what we've seen is that almost line in the sand change of pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. If you remember at, I think it was TPM last year, you had Robert Gates speaking. And when you have somebody who's basically a geopolitical and defense specialist speaking at what is arguably a transportation and supply chain conference, you probably have a problem. And what he spoke of, and I think it's absolutely true, is he said, look, you've just had the best 30-year run you're probably ever going to have in globalization, international trade, and the world has changed, and it's all changed dramatically. On the geopolitical side, it's much more risky, it's much more uncertain, and now you have to embrace this new world with these new dynamics. And of course, that's a big change for everybody. And just as you referenced all the items that we've seen in the last year, some of those are geopolitical, some of them are natural, some of them are a combination. But for our space, it's unfortunate in one way, but on the other side, I don't know if there's ever been a better time to be in this space, because almost all customers now realize that the first requirement to having any resiliency in their supply chain is they have to have visibility. And the fact is, for the vast majority of them, they do that in a older, more outdated way. They maybe are still relying on systems or methodologies that were developed in the 90s or the early 2000s. And supply chain now is front and center pretty much on every C-suite as far as, hey, how am I going to get better control of this? And remember, we have the geopolitical changes with China, and we see what's happening in Mexico. We see what's happening in South America. All of a sudden, the trade flows are changing dramatically. The partners that our big Fortune 500 customers have to deal with, and what I mean by partners, they're ocean carrier partners, they're motor carrier partners, they're rail partners, they're changing. It's dynamic, and oftentimes they're forced into areas that they typically maybe didn't want to work in, or maybe they're unfamiliar with those spaces. And so for us, no, it's good. And what we've also seen is the framing of how customers view visibility has changed dramatically, and that many of them now talk about risk management. They say, hey, it used to be I was trying to get all these efficiencies, whether it was as mundane as D&D management or as vaunted as customer experience. But now what we see people are saying is, hey, foundationally, this is a risk management tool. I got to know what happened, what shipments are impacted, and then, hey, I've got to take action. The Baltimore Bridge was a great example.
Yep. So, I mean, I think one thing noticed during the pandemic was that there was a intense focus from especially the BCO community, and then certainly secondarily on the 3PL forwarder community on serving those BCOs in ramping up their ocean visibility, right? I think, is it fair to say that because of you and some of the other companies that came out 10 years ago, that over the road visibility is a more mature market than ocean? Or is it just sort of, and not to say it's easy, but it's a little more straightforward to track than ocean? I'm just curious, like because right where we are right now, is there more demand on the ocean side or on the over the road side, or is it a mix, or are people now starting to actually say, no, I need one platform for all modes?
Yeah, so that's a gnarly question in there, and there's a lot of angles. But basically, what we see today is everybody wants all modes. So that's a given. So the expectation is, as a visibility provider, you should come in and be able to competently say, nope, I can cover all modes and I can cover all geos. That's a complicated question, because there's huge variability if we just take the FTL market in North America and Europe versus how South America works versus one of our big new markets is China, how you do road tracking in China. They're all different. Everybody thinks they're kind of similar, they're the same, but they are not. There's complexity in that. Number two, so customers basically are asking for all those things. The second thing is, what's the profile of the customer? Clearly, for your bigger Fortune 500 companies who have big, complex supply chains, what they initially want to focus on is ocean. Why? Because the variability in the geopolitical instability, it generally directly impacts ocean. These flows that are changing in Southeast Asia and China aren't changing because of anything physical. They're changing because of the politics between the trading partners. For many of these companies who are buying or sourcing from those locations or selling into those locations, ocean is the longest part of the supply chain. So it's only natural that they say, hey, where I should focus my efforts initially, if my production cycle is 30 days, but my transport and logistics cycle is another 75 days, what I should probably focus on first to get control of, if I see big variability in my supply chain, is what is that long ocean leg? So it's natural that many of those people gravitate towards that space. The road space, typically for SMBs or smaller regional customers, absolutely, that's the thing they want first. If you predominantly operate just in Europe or just in North America, ocean is of marginal interest to you. So a long-winded way of saying, I think it depends on the profile of the customer, and I think it depends on the scope of their business and their supply chain. It isn't a uniform small versus large, but sometimes there's a correlation there. When we talk about and I think this was the nature of your question, the maturity of these markets, then it's, and what I'm talking about there is the maturity and how readily accessible is quality visibility information. Here, it gets a lot more complicated. So if you go back, we can take ocean first, because that's a pretty linear, clear story. If we go back to the early days in the 90s, when the carriers were essentially doing their first efforts at networking, pre-internet, where you set up LANs and WANs and you had to lay cable, the intention of getting container tracking was very, very different. It had nothing to do with the customers. Customers still went to their customs house broker. They got their arrival notice. They would get a notification via a phone call or a fax, or the new thing was email. There wasn't this idea that people would be going to a platform to see all their equipment. The ocean carriers built out all those systems and solutions originally to track containers. They needed to know where the containers were so they could take more bookings. If I'm going to take export bookings, what do I need to know? I need to know how many empties do I have sitting in my local CY. When the internet comes, that evolves greatly. All of a sudden, the carriers realize, wait a minute, I employ literally, and again, it's only a decade or so ago, literally tens of thousands of people to answer calls and then emails and faxes each day, answering simple questions about what is the status of my booking and where's my equipment, where's my shipment. And what they realized is, hey, we don't need to do that anymore. If we build these platforms and rewind, think about Intra, think about GT Nexus, think about Cargo Smart. First, get the booking on the platforms. Then secondly, give them visibility there. It's a huge savings for the ocean carriers, and it's a huge benefit for the customer. The only problem was data quality was not high. It was pretty poor. And there were still many cases where customers were relying on forwarders, and they would collect the data manually and update their systems. A long-winded way of saying, up until about even when I think of the clear metal days, when we first started, and that would have been about 8 years ago, when we began ingesting all that carrier data, we threw out anywhere from 20 to 40% of it. And the reason we threw it out is because we realized it was completely fake data. It was auto-generated 315s. When the vessel departs every port at 12 o'clock at midnight, okay, that's probably not a real message. That's a fake. And then as soon as we attached the satellite tracking data, we said, hey, that's all garbage. You can't use that data. What's happened, though, is the ocean carriers in the last, I'd say 7 to 8 years, in response to their customers, they've improved the data quality enormously. Now, today at Shippeo, we don't really throw out much carrier data at all. We see the quality level is much, much better than it was in the past. And that's with all the majors and many of the smaller guys. So when we talk about data quality and visibility, what's happened on the ocean side is you've seen an enormous jump in the quality of the data. But at the same time, as every shipper will tell you, you've seen a huge degradation in the service of the underlying actual service. The on-time performance of the carriers and the schedule integrity, it's not good, as anybody can read in the JOC articles at pretty much any given time. So a long-winded way of saying, again, ocean carrier data, it's gotten way better. It's harder to get them connected in some ways than it was in the past, but the quality itself is good. When we switch over, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I wanted to get into that sort of connecting to the carrier data, because that's an issue unto itself. But yeah, go on, because you were going to talk about road, I think.
Let me give you 30 seconds on road. I'll try to be
Yeah.
brief because I know we've only got a half hour. But on road, you have basically the two big developed markets, Europe and North America, and they developed in different ways. While both visibility markets got their start because of the ELD mandates on trucks for distance drivers. And that was mainly, remember, all those ELDs were put on not initially for tracking per se for visibility, but tracking of the driver's hours. Most countries realized in Europe and North America there was a legitimate safety issue with drivers driving too long, getting tired. And they said, hey, we've got to better control the hours of the drivers. That'll be a benefit to everybody on the road. And so that's what was done. What our competitors realized and Shippeo immediately realized is, hey, that can all be used to track data and people want that data. So the first thing is everyone gravitates towards ELDs. Hey, you connect the ELD, I've got perfect data. I can see a truck at any given time, and now I have all the tracking I need. That's the happy day story. The reality of it is a lot of truckers don't want to be tracked. You know, your independent operator says, no, that's not exactly for me. The other thing you get into, and it varies greatly in North America and in Europe, is the issue of ELD, or not issue, but the challenges of tracking via an ELD, tracking via TMS, tracking via a handheld device, and then data quality. Because I'll boil it down to what I think is its simplest element. It is no challenge to get a dot on a map of where a truck is today. There's many different technological sources or channels you can use to get that data. The real challenge is, can you pair the transport order? What is the origin? What is the destination? What are the stops? And then predict the arrival of that truck. That's the challenge. If you don't pair the tracking to the transport order, what you essentially have are a bunch of dots on a map. And the way that developed in Europe and the way that developed in the USA was different. Whereas in the USA, it's still in many cases, for some visibility providers, remained mainly an ELD environment where they ask the drivers to manually pair things, which equals low data quality. In Europe, it was all about, you have to do that, but you also have to integrate into TMS systems. So for Shippeo, our big thing on the data quality side was, how do you get the highest quality data? And it's typically you get the highest quality data when you can pair that transport order with the dots on a map to give the customer real visibility about, did it arrive at the origin? Did it leave? Did it arrive at its destination?
Yep. So there's a question from Jerry Levy in the comments about, should we consider contingency planning as part of the visibility sort of realm or function, or is it a consequence of having better visibility as you improve your contingency planning? How do you, I guess maybe that's a lead in to talk about, like, how does Shippeo think about like the extensibility of its product? Is it,
sure,
you know, I know this is a bad word, but I'm just going to use it anyway. Is it a silo of information that a company can use in a, you know, whatever way it wants to? Or are you thinking, how do we improve a customer's ability to, you know, contingency plan more directly?
Yeah, spot on. His question is 100% valid, and that's what most of our customers are asking. So the foundational thing is, you got to get visibility. If you don't know where your stuff is and some sort of idea of when it's going to arrive, you're lost. You can't do any contingency planning. You're in no credible position to react to any of these disruptions. Now that our customers have this visibility and they say, hey, that's great. You told me about the disruption on the bridge, and we told them all their boxes on the terminal, all their boxes coming into Baltimore. We could tell them, hey, these are all the ones that are going to be impacted. Now have at it. What customers are asking for now is they're saying, well, wait a minute. Why can't you tell me then maybe what I should do? What is your recommendation in this? And that's where I have 2 points that are probably relevant to that. One, we're developing our transport process automation solution, which addresses exactly that, which is to say, it answers the so what, now what question. So what? You told me there's a disruption. Now what am I supposed to do about it? And so our goal, and this will take place over the next few years as we build it out further, is to be able to credibly, not made up, but credibly make recommendations that as we get deeper into the supply chain tracking of POs and things of that nature, we can begin to recommend to customers to say, hey, we see that ship going to Baltimore is going to be diverted. You were actually going to have a load on that ship that was exported or to be exported to, say, Northern Europe. That's not going to happen now. Maybe it is worthwhile in this instance to buy air freight and engage in that. The other thing that we're doing right now with many of our customers is making the system extensible in the sense that we work very closely with companies like E2Open and Google. E2Open has many systems that allow you to do exactly that, contingency planning and reaction to disruptions. And with the Google Cloud Group, what we've done with one of our customers, Renault, is we built their, I believe it's the first digital twin for supply chain. So Renault, as most of you know, is a pretty big auto manufacturer. What we've done there with Google's help is we put all that information in there. And then what the Google and the Renault people have done is they simulate scenarios in this digital twin. So they can do exactly that, contingency planning.
Yeah. Very interesting. Sanam, thanks so much for your comments. It's a good one. I ultimately the buck stops with the customer, right? Like the customer needs to know it's their freight. They need to know how to use these tools and analyze things. Can't just hand this stuff off.
Yeah, there's no magic bullet there.
There's no magic bullet. I just wanted to say, hey, hi to Eric, hi to Basi, hi to Rodrigo. Thank you so much for joining us. I think there was another person from Charleston that's joining us. Thanks so much for joining us today. Okay, I have so many more. I have way more questions than we're going to be able to fit in today, but we knew that going in, Chris. Okay, so let's talk a bit about. I mean, you mentioned the data quality piece, and for as long as I've known you, that's been your hobby horse, for lack of a better term, is you've talked about the focus always has to be on the data quality. So I have a couple things to ask about this. One, you sort of referenced that while the quality of ocean carrier data has improved, it can be difficult to get access to it, right? And one of the things that we're going to be talking about at TPM is sort of what is the state of play when it comes to carrier APIs. Now, APIs is a term that if I asked a carrier 8 years ago, outside of someone in their technical department, in the IT, I would have been greeted with a blank stare back at me. Right. And now, obviously, everybody's, in the world of business sort of, I think, has a basic or better understanding of APIs. Where are we in terms of the way Shippeo or your customers can sort of access the data that is now improving on the back end?
Sure. So
and that's, by the way, that's like we're going to do a 30-minute session on this, and you have like 4 minutes. So
okay, 4 minutes. Sorry, so you're telling me keep it brief. Okay, the 30-second version is.
I have other things I want to ask you.
So the carriers, congratulations. Most of them have built out their APIs and publicly available platforms. The first thing I'll say related to that is, remember, the API in and of itself doesn't change the nature of the quality of the data. The underlying data that they get from the terminal operator, the motor carrier, the rail operator, it's the same data. The APIs do not clean data. What they do, ideally, is provide you with easier access. The question in the market is, for most of the technology guys, is, are you going to get the best access to the best data via API, via EDI, or some other methodology? Today, although we see the APIs and we are experimenting with many of them, one of the challenges has nothing to do with the data quality. It has to do with the carriers adopting a principle of having a letter of authorization for an API, whether it's a push or a pull. What does that mean? If you're a customer or a shipper who is listed on the master bill of lading as a shipper or a consignee, we can get that data automatically pushed to us via the 315 model that's been in place for 20 years. That is still the highest quality standard. That means instantaneously, whenever the carrier sees your name, they push the data to us. There's no requesting a container. There's no looking at a booking or a bill of lading. They do that based on the entity names of you, the customer. That is what we want the APIs to emulate. For the push API that most of the carriers offer with an LOA, broadly, it's fine. It's the same more or less as the 315 process, and that works great. And it looks like, although there's variability with the carriers on the API, just like there is in the 315, more or less most of the same data is there. The problem is the vast majority of the market that is not listed on the ocean carrier master bill of lading, who use NVOCCs or book-through forwarders. The carriers do offer a pull API, and the original idea was to eliminate scraping and all those technologies and say, look, we can securely control now who has access to that data. The problem is there's an LOA process around that now with just about all carriers. Okay, if you're putting an LOA process around that, the true customer, that's our customer, who's using an NVO, isn't known to the ocean carrier because the ocean carrier only knows the NVO. So in those cases, although we have the access to the direct customer, and you could argue that, hey, that's the most credible person to ask for access to that data, you're essentially blocked out via the LOA process. That's something we're speaking with the carriers about and hoping to figure out how to resolve, because we do want to use those pull APIs for sure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Have a couple more questions from the audience. Basi is asking, how can visibility be used to prevent missing shipments? I've seen situations where there's fleet visibility but still have missing shipments. How do you, is that, yeah, how do you sort of approach that? Is that an issue of, where you use the vessel essentially as a proxy once you know that the container has been loaded, or versus, sort of like a smart container approach? I'm sort of taking, I don't know. I might be taking some liberties with that question, but yeah.
There's a lot of angles to that question. I know it sounded simple, but so the first one is we do exactly what you said, like everybody. Not many people track, unless you have an IoT device in the container, you're not tracking it as it goes across the ocean. You're using the vessel as a proxy. But one of the things we do when we talk about missing shipments rather than missing containers is, first of all, we contextualize the data. And that is, we get from our customers the POs, the SKU, the item level numbers at the ingestion side. So we take that into our system, we match it up with the booking, the bill of lading, and the container, so they can begin first to trace, not by looking up a bill of lading or a container number, but by looking up a PO number or a shipment number. That's the first thing, to give them down to the shipment level visibility that most customers want. The second thing we get into is we have hypergranular milestones. So what we try to do, and when we talk about missing shipments, I don't know if we're talking about blank sailings, if we're talking about rolled bookings, if we're talking about bookings or containers that weren't captured on a gate out. What we do is we try to capture literally every single milestone in the journey. So if there's 3 transshipments, we're going to capture every arrival, every load and discharge at those transshipment ports, and try to give you that hypergranular visibility to eliminate the missing shipments. Due to things like a roll or due to things like a blank or missed sailing. And then the third thing is, if you really want to get down to the shipment level and you want to track pallets, sure, we, like everybody else, are getting into the business of ingesting IoT data and being able to match that up with the container data and the satellite data and all the other data streams we get. I'd say that's a relatively new aspect in the market, and there's many device providers out there. Yep. If you have a high value cargo, yeah, it might make sense to put an IoT device on it.
Yep. And, the carriers are at various stages of, some have gone all in on equipping their boxes with devices that you could potentially tap into. Others are either thinking about it or have not started. Others are, only using it as a premium service for specific shippers with specific, like you said, specific type of goods that are either high value or moving through lanes that are known to be a little dicey. So yeah, it's definitely not a set market these days.
But you did highlight, and I know we're getting to the end, but something that I think is a relevant development when we see what Hapag's doing, or ONE and Zim, as far as the device approach on a container. Remember, a device approach on a container, it does give you that more granular visibility, but not exactly down to the shipment level. Right. If you truly want shipment down to pallet or SKU or something like that, that's a different type of tracking. But we are following closely what those guys are doing and can't wait till that data is available, because that essentially gives us a more granular data stream to provide to our shipper and BCO customers. But there is a difference of opinion there. If I think of, I haven't spoken with them in the last year, but what MSC, and I think they articulated this at TPM over a year ago, they said, hey, yeah, you want device tracking? We can absolutely do it. But there's a charge for that. We're not going to put it on every box. And for most customers, they say, I don't need it, I don't want it. But for those who do need it or want it, yeah, that's a valuable service, and I think they're willing to pay for it.
Yep. So maybe one more question before I get to my last question. This is a favorite topic of mine when it comes to visibility. So, and I don't think, from my perspective, there's definitely not unanimity on this, but I'm interested to get your perspective. Where are you seeing your customers fall on the spectrum of, I just need Shippeo to provide me the absolute best information. I have internal BI tools. I have internal tools that I need to pipe that into. I don't need an application to help me understand it, versus the shipper who doesn't have those resources, needs the application that is actually telling them what the quality data is saying. Where do you think, where does Shippeo's customer sort of plot on that spectrum?
It really depends on the customer profile. So if we talk with a Fortune 500 company, the initial discussion almost always begins around the fact, hey, we've got all the systems we need. Software is ubiquitous. We have our data lake. We have our analytical tools. We've invested tens, if not hundreds of millions in a TMS. Just give me the best data. Great, we're happy to do that. And that's almost always where it starts. The challenge you get into is when we show them our insights report or we show them our front end, oftentimes they'll say, hey, actually, I like that front end better. Or those reports, they're much easier to use and configure than maybe what we have. And that's where we oftentimes initially sell just the data, but then the customer says, I want access to the platform too, because users might find it more accessible or more easy. Some customers don't do that at all. They say, nope, you're just the data guy. I don't want anybody on your front end. Use completely my own internal ones. But I would say the majority of customers, particularly the larger ones, they're a hybrid model. They use our data to ingest into their S/4HANA system or their data lake and their own analytics, but they're using our front end, particularly their S&OP people or their day-to-day tracking people. When we get to smaller customers, then it's usually a different story. They want both. They may have bought a TMS or they may have solutions, but they'll be usually the first to admit, hey, maybe it's not the greatest or I haven't invested that much. I want the high quality Shippeo data. I absolutely require that, but I also need that front end because I don't have a front end to do on one platform the ocean tracking and the trucking tracking and the rail tracking. They definitely see benefit that we give them that platform and that front end so they can see everything. So the long-winded answer to your question is it really depends on the customer profile.
Yep. And in general, I think that sort of maps against what I see. Okay, we've pretty much run out of time. My favorite question, the question I ask of every single guest to finish off the show: who's your favorite band or musician? And you have to tell me why. We talked briefly about music last week, so I'm interested to hear who the answer to this question is.
Yeah, I saw that in the preparation stuff, and I thought, I don't think I've ever thought about my favorite. But I'd have to say my favorite is Pat Metheny. And the reason I say that is just because of his creativity. Every album, you're never exactly sure what you're going to get, but you know you're going to get something that's, the performance is well thought out, and it's just super high quality stuff. So I'd say, yeah, that's where I lie.
All right. What do you remember your first time you heard him?
Yeah, I do. It was in a movie. What was it? The movie was with, I think, Sean Penn. This Is Not America. I think that was the movie about the spy. And anyway, I heard this song and I thought, that's very interesting. It was with David Bowie. And I was more interested, I have to admit, in the background band. And I thought, who is that? So back then, that was pre-internet days. I had to do a little research at the music store. And it said, hey, this guy's Pat Metheny. And I had never known about him. I grew up in the 70s, but wasn't that aware. And then I said, all right, I'll find out more about him. And then I started seeing him and thought, yeah, this is great.
Cool. Well, that is definitely a new addition to our LogTech Live playlist. So I appreciate it. That's a great one. Chris, thanks so much. I appreciate it. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, the easiest way is you're easily contactable via my email. That's christopher.mazza@shippeo.com. Or we have a great website. If you want any of our white papers or you want to contact me or anybody on the team, just go on there. You can easily register and we'll usually respond within a few hours.
Cool. Well, I appreciate it. Great perspective, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks so
again
much for having me,
for
Eric.
your event last week too. So
Oh, it was a pleasure having you. The customers appreciate it.
great. Thanks, Chris. All right. Great conversation. Chris is a wealth of knowledge, to say the least. He's forgotten more about this industry than I'll probably ever know. So, all right, it's about that time. Dad joke of the week. I like this one. What did Yoda say when he saw himself on a 4K TV screen? HDMI. Sorry, I screwed that up. HDMI. Think about it for a second. It's pretty good if you think about it. Assuming I don't screw up the punchline. Thank you to Chris. Awesome conversation. Long overdue. I've been wanting to have him on the show for a while. Being at their event last week was sort of the catalyst for having him on this week. Thank you to all of you who tuned in today, especially those who put in some amazing questions. It's always great to have interaction from the audience and have questions for our guest. Thank you to the Let's Talk Supply Chain team, especially Nicole, who I owe big time, and who's the world's greatest producer. But really, the whole Let's Talk Supply Chain team is awesome. Makes my job super easy. Thank you most of all to everyone who tuned in. Have a great weekend, and I will see you in a couple weeks. I think 3 weeks, because it's like one of those five Friday months. But have a great episode lined up for you next episode, and see you soon. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.